Welcome, city officials, and thank you for joining us for the final Form 700 filer information session offered before the April 1st, 2021 annual filing deadline. Before we begin today's session, we'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. Today's session is being recorded. Presentation slides and recording will be available online at sfethics.org within 48 hours. Attendee microphones will be automatically muted during this presentation. Attendee video is disabled during the entire session. During the Q&A segment, attendees joining on computer and/or laptop who wish to ask a question should raise hand by selecting the hand icon and wait for the host to call on your name and unmute your mic. If you are joining by telephone, dial *3 to raise your hand. For those who may not be familiar with the raise hand functionality in the WebEx platform, rest assured instructions will be provided during the Q&A portion of today's session. Questions may also be submitted via email to ethics.commission@sfgov.org. Once again, questions may also be submitted via email to ethics.commission@sfgov.org. Questions submitted by email should receive a response within 3 business days. I will now turn it over to Pat Peterson, our Engagement and Compliance Officer, who will lead today's session. Pat, let me stop sharing and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you.
Pat, you're opening Outlook. You want to open up your...
Thank you.
Okay, perfect.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for attending. I miss seeing people in person, but I am so glad to see so many people attending this session because I really have missed the opportunity to reach out to each and every one of you about filing a paper Form 700. Why do we do this? What's the impetus behind it? And how do you know what to report? And how do you fill out those crazy schedules? What do you do with that paper Form 700 once you are finished signing it? And this year, pandemic crazy, why do you have to mail in a wet signature? We're going to talk about all of that. This is the second and last of our filer information sessions. It's March 17th, and this session is for designated filers. These are employees who file a paper Form 700 on paper. So we're going to talk about the agenda right now. There's 4 areas that we want to cover. We're going to talk about an overview of the Statement of Economic Interest. What is it? Why do we do it? Why are we being asked to do this? We are employees. Where did this come from? We're going to talk about the actual form, the Form 700 and its schedules. We're going to talk about some things that affect all of us as city officials, also known as employees, and those are gift laws and conflict of interest code reviews so that we know what we have to disclose on this Form 700 and not more. And then lastly, we're going to go over quickly the filer support and resources that are available to you, both locally at the Ethics Commission's office and at the state level Fair Political Practices Commission. All right, so now we're going to start with the overview of the Statement of Economic Interest. So the Statement of Economic Interest, Form 700, is managed by the State Political Reform Act. And the Annual Statement of Economic Interest, Form 700, it's required to be filed by public officials and designated employees, that's you, throughout the state every spring, this year, April 1st. You also have to file it within 30 days of joining the city, so you've probably already done this. And you have to file it within 30 days of switching from leaving the office. We'll talk about some exceptions. For example, if you switch from one agency or department to another, in which case you just keep on filing. But generally, you file those 3 Form 700s. When you start with the city, 1 every full year that you're working, and then 1 when you leave. So why do we file a Statement of Economic Interest Form 700? Well, by disclosing our assets that we hold that are relevant to the city and county of San Francisco and relevant to our positions, that information is made public. And it provides necessary information to the public about our financial interests. And that way, the officials, us, the public knows that we're making decisions in the best interest of the public and not enhancing our personal finances. And it's also really good for transparency because it serves as a reminder to us as we're reviewing these forms, thinking about what we do for our jobs. It reminds us of a potential conflict of interest so that we can make sure that we don't make a decision that's not in the public interest, or we participate in a governmental decision that is deemed a conflict of interest. So that's how what we are doing, it supports transparency for the public to see what we own, and it reminds us of our accountability obligation to the public. Now, you may have heard that some people are filing electronically and some people are filing on paper, and you're going, well, how do I know which one that I do? Right now, there are 2 groups. The group that files electronically is just elected officials, department heads, board members, and commissioners. You're here because you're what's known as a designated employee, and you will be filing on paper. Just by the way, as we go through these slides, and this slide deck will be available on our website where you went to join this meeting, there will be links in the bottom right-hand corner where if you click on those links, it'll take you to information about what we're talking about. So just sit back, listen, don't worry about notes. You can always look up what we're talking about here. So let's go over, just again, those 3 different Form 700s that are required. Now, what's confusing is that when you look at that paper Form 700, it's only a single form. What makes it an assuming, an annual, or a leaving form is which box you check off. So just a reminder that assuming office filing is due within 30 days of joining the city. Thereafter, every full year that you're working, you file what's called an annual. It's due every April 1st. You're reporting for the past year, kind of like taxes. And then when you leave the city, make sure you file a Form 700 within 30 days to report what you're doing in the current year. Remember, that annual that you file is reporting for the last year. When you leave office, you want to file for just that portion of the current year. There is an exception for those of you who may be a new hire. So if you started between October 1 of last year and you joined recently, you don't have to file an annual right now. We'll talk about this in more detail later, but the assuming office reports for the past year of assets that you held. So if you filed an annual now, reporting for last year, it's kind of redundant. So that's why if you assumed office between October 1 of last year and today, skip that April 1 deadline. Just file that assuming you're done until next year. So let's talk just briefly about filing an annual Form 700 on paper, which may be why most of you are here. So you're a designated employee. Your department has designated you, and I'll show you where to look it up in the code. Your department has designated you as having a position that makes decisions on behalf of the city that could affect your personal financial interests. You're going to complete and sign the Form 700 on paper. You're going to submit it to your filing officer, the person who gave you the form, by the due date, which this year is April 1st. and you're going to do it with a wet signature. It has to be a wet signature. If you're going to mail it, please, please, please make sure that it's postmarked by April 1, 2021. We will be keeping the envelopes. Now, you may be wondering why in this era of DocuSign, Adobe, all of these different ways and easier ways, frankly, to submit a document to somebody. The reason is it's required by the law. The Form 700 is a state of California form. We are all adhering, each one of us, we are all adhering to state law. That said, electronic filing is on the horizon. Fingers crossed, you'll be hearing from us in January 1, 2022 about how to e-file. Stay tuned. That's more for me than you, frankly. So just a reminder about these Form 700s. These state forms, they are public. Now, if you wanted to look up the filing of anybody, those electeds, department heads, board members, commissioners, if you wanted to look it up electronically to see what they filed and what they reported, you can do it. It's on the disclosures page of the Ethics Commission. It's going to be redacted, but if just like now, if someone were to come into our office or request a copy, it's provided as it was written, completely unredacted. Your Form 700s on paper, they are also public to anybody who asks, and there is a retention policy. They are maintained with your department for 7 years. There's certain conditions where if it's maintained electronically, the paper may be available for a shorter period of time, but your Form 700, what you reported, is always available to the public. Now then, what happens if you don't file it? This state form, there is no provision in the law to extend the Form 700 due date. There are situations where you are incapacitated, hospitalized, you are deployed for military purposes. So those filings occur later, but unless you have that written documentation and you meet very specific conditions, there's no extension. It's due April 1st this year. Remember, for every late filing, there's a late fee of $10 per day up to $100 for each required filing. So if you sit on a board and you are an employee and your Form 700 is late, you're going to be paying a late fee for each form filed. So that's 2 forms, one for your board or commission, one for your employee position. Now here's the big one. This is a big one. Non-filers can be subject to disciplinary and/or enforcement actions with potential fines of up to $5,000 per violation. This applies to paper filers, not just our electeds, not just our department heads, boards, or commissioners. It applies to you too. Remember that, please. So that said, amendments to a filed Form 700 can always be made. You file your Form 700 on paper, so if you amend it on paper. Please be sure that if you have an amendment, just reach out to us or check the Fair Political Practices site because the form changes every year. Just like a tax return, if you're going to file an amendment to a 2019 tax form, you can't use a current form. Use the form and the amendment that applies to the current year, please. And if you have questions, reach out to the Ethics Commission. We can help you. Amendments can be made to either this year's filing or prior year's filings. What to look for? Make the amendment as soon as possible after the error or omission is noticed. There isn't a time frame for it, but make that amendment as soon as you know there's a need to. If you have any questions, contact your department's filing officer, the person who gave you the form, or our office with questions. Again, just a reminder in that lower right-hand corner, if you have detailed questions, go ahead and click on the links in the slide deck. So now the fun stuff. We're going to go on to the Form 700 review. General reminders, and again, we're talking about the annual that you're going to submit April 1st. The reporting period is 2020. So you are going to plug in the annual filing, and you are reporting for January 1, 2020 through December 31, 2020. Here's what's really important. The form looks like it has a lot of blanks, and you may have something to disclose about every single blank, but you may not have to. You may not have to, and we do not want you to over-report. So please be sure you know your disclosure category. It's going to be based on your working job title, and we're going to talk about how to find this out. It may put limits on what you have to report. For example, you may have to report only contractual activity or business interests or income from an entity that does business with the department that you work for. If your disclosure category puts that limit on it, that's all you have to report. Don't talk about your rental home that you gain income from. Don't talk about gifts. Don't talk about anything that's on the form that's outside of what's in your disclosure category. So important. And just generally, as you're going through this, be sure to report the financial interests that include just not yours, but that of your spouse or partner, and also the interest of your dependent children. Just that general, keep that stuff in your mind. Let's talk about that all-important disclosure category. Now, your filing officer can help you look up this information, but the links on our slide deck and the information available on the website will guide you to look up something called the San Francisco Campaign and Governmental Conduct Code. The way that you do it is you click on the link that we provide, it takes you to the code, and then you are going to look for the name of your department. So the example in this screenshot is the Ethics Commission. It's our office. If you clicked on that hyperlink in blue, next to the words Ethics Commission, you would see what our department has determined is the positions, the working job titles that should file, and what it means, what we have to disclose. So, for example, say a member of the public wants to look up your Form 700. They're not going to say, oh, I want the 1844 because that's the job classification that I'm interested in the person who files at the Ethics Commission. Well, the public doesn't know that. The public knows what we do. So, for example, if they were looking up the interest of a senior fellow who was assigned to the Ethics Commission or our deputy director, they wouldn't have to know what the human resources job classification number is. They would be able to look it up by title. That's that left-hand screen there. Filing officers and department heads are your points of contact for questions generally, but if you have questions or you just want to talk to us, do reach out to us. We'll talk about that in resources at the last slide. Again, I cannot emphasize this enough. Please, please, please know what your disclosure category is. Make sure you don't have to report more than you may be putting on that form. It's your information. So let's talk about the cover page, because many of you don't have anything to report, but we have to make sure that this cover page is filled out correctly. It is reviewed for every single filer, and it is reported to the Ethics Commission so that we know that the form is complete and it has been signed, and that you are listing the correct department. So in section 1, you're going to be talking about the department that you work for. When it says your position, be sure to list your working job title. Please do not put a city job classification. Make sure that you identify the schedules that you're actually submitting. That's in section 4, outlined in red. Before we go forward, item 3, the type of statement, be sure to click annual if what you are doing is filing for all of 2020, January 1 through December 31, 2020. And lastly, sign the form. We need your signature. We need it in wet ink, and we need the original this year. Sign the form, or we will have to bounce it back at you, and it will not be on time. But what if you do have something to report? There's a number of schedules that have to be reported. Schedules A, about investments, there's two groups. One where you own less than 10% of the business, but you have an investment in the business, or you own more than 10%. You're going to be reporting things like stocks and bonds. You're going to be reporting income, the assets of the business entity or trust. All of this is detailed in the Form 700 guide. It's the 23-page form that you've probably been provided or given a link to, but the instructions are there. In Schedule B, you'll be talking about your interest in real property. Remember, you don't have to list your home. You don't have to list your domicile. The property also has to be within the city and county of San Francisco's boundaries, but it also includes properties owned within 2 miles of the property owned by the city. So for example, that would include 2 miles within the San Francisco airport because the city of San Francisco owns the airport. If you have any questions, reach out to us. In Schedule C, you're going to be reporting any income, loans, and business positions for positions held in doing business in the city and county of San Francisco. Under certain circumstances, you'll also have to report gifts and gifts of travel for work, for travel that is not provided by the city as part of your job. That's just a general overview of what the schedules require. If you have a Schedule A1 disclosure, this is where you have an ownership of less than 10%. Be sure to report investments that are required that are worth more than $2,000 or more. Any stocks or bonds that you choose, not something that would be encompassed in something where you give a broker a quantity of money and say, here, invested in something risky or moderate or very safe. If you are investing in that sense, it's likely that you don't have to report the stocks or bonds. Reach out to us with detailed questions. Generally, mutual funds are not required to be disclosed. Again, this is just an overview, how to think about the schedules and what you should be thinking about reporting or not reporting. The other half of Schedule A is for investments in entities where you own more than 10% of the business. You'll have to disclose your position of business ownership, and you have to report any client that was a source of income of more than $10,000 in 2020. You'll also have to report trust funds, but only the piece that's in your trust fund that is a disclosable asset. Schedule B, your interest in real property. So the definition of real property that has to be reported is an interest worth more than $2,000 or more, owned within the city and county of San Francisco. Remember, don't include your home. Be sure to report rental income from properties also owned within the city and county, including if you rent out a room. You don't have to report the entire home, just the piece that you get rental income from. The tenants' names are also reported. Remember, when it's talking about personal mortgages, you don't have to report a personal mortgage value if it's at a rate that any member of the public could walk in and get. So if it's just a regular bank loan that you applied for and obtained, you don't have to report that. Now we're on to Schedule C. We're talking about income, loans, and business positions. If you have a business position and you have a source of income of $500 or more, it's reportable. You do not have to report your city income. No governmental salaries have to be reported. You do have to report, though, the income from businesses and nonprofits. Be sure to report if you sold your home or a car again, a source of income of $500 or more, you have to report it. When you think about the source of your income, think about whether the entity conducts business within the city. If it's a business that was formed outside of the city and county of San Francisco, if you're doing business here, if they have a branch location here, if it's an online business and you're doing it out of your home, it's reportable. And make sure that you don't double report your business ownership as employment. Schedule D, gifts. So remember that gifts with a cumulative value, so it can be a couple of gifts, but a cumulative value of $50 or more, you have to report it. For last year, that you're looking at a cumulative value of gifts of not more than $500, and that's a typo, should be in 2020, from a single source. That's one entity. We talked about that there are exceptions to having to report gifts. Some common ones are gifts from your family members, or if you go to a conference, when you went to conferences, and everybody who walked in got a swag bag, and it had books, and it had things to walk away from the conference with, and everybody got a bag, that informational material associated with the conference admission doesn't have to be reported. Again, general concepts, the guide that you received has more information. That Fair Political Practices site has more information about gifts and honoraria. Check it out. Then if you still have questions, reach out to your departmental filing officer or the Ethics Commission. But check out what's online first. It's pretty good stuff, and it's very, very comprehensive. Check it out. And then the last schedule is income that is associated with a gift of travel. So again, you don't have to report a gift of travel if it's from a family member, and you don't have to report travel paid for by the city that's part of your job. So that concludes just that really brief overview of the schedules attached to the Form 700. Let's talk in a little bit more detail about the gift rules. Again, that reminder, the gift rule, the gift limit for 2020 is $500. It's going to go up by a whopping $20 next year. When you are receiving gifts, make sure that it's not a restricted source associated with your department. This is identified in a number of sources, statements of incompatible activities. It's available. We can assist you as well. Reach out if you have any questions. In general, it's just wise not to accept gifts from subordinates. Just a way to stay out of trouble. And this is just it seems like a non sequitur, but this is just to bring to your attention how it was determined what you are to report. So a moment ago, we looked at the San Francisco Campaign and Governmental Conduct Code. It describes what your disclosure category is. It might be a 1 or a 2. If you're at a larger agency, it might be up to 7. But that code review, that list of who has to file a Form 700, what they have to disclose, that is determined by your department, not by the Ethics Commission. If you ask us why you have to file, we can't answer. We can tell you whether you have to file and what you have to disclose, but we can't tell you why. That review is done every 2 years, and it was just finished. It was just finished February 22nd. It goes through this process where the departments inform the city attorney's office. The city attorney's office takes it through motion to the Board of Supervisors. The Board of Supervisors votes on it, and it becomes effective. This year, the changes were updated based on work done in 2020, and it became effective February 22nd. And we are just pretty darn close. We're now looking at filer support and resources. This is to reinforce that there are lots of ways to get answers to your questions. There's filing assistance from your departmental filing officer, generally the person who handed you that Form 700 or sent you that email saying, please file. Ask them first. They are a wealth of information. They have access to resources, where to look it up, typically answers that you might find helpful. It's your quickest way to get an answer to your question. If you still have questions, reach out to us. Reach out to our main mailbox, ethics.commission@sfgov.org. We are answering the phone if you leave a voicemail, and we'll get back to you. And then you can also reach out to the Fair Political Practices Commission. We do provide a phone number, but at this point in time, while we're all sheltering in place, like every department, they are transitioning. So they may accept voicemails, but typically they will tell you an email address to reach out to them at. And then lastly, reach out to the deputy city attorney assigned to your department, but coordinate with your filing officer, because again, your filing officer may already know the answers, may be working on it with your department's deputy city attorney, but be sure to coordinate through your filing officer so the deputy city attorney doesn't get slammed or hear repeated questions or otherwise not be able to help as many people in your department as possible. Repeating those online resources. Look at the Ethics Commission website, sfethics.org. You can Google San Francisco Ethics Commission. You will get all sorts of information about compliance. Check there. Please check there. And then the Fair Political Practices Commission, the promulgator of this Form 700, they have information as well. When you log onto our website, you're going to get bumped in the main banner to the Statement of Economic Interest. File your Form 700. It's going to take you to our pages. This is one of our main landing pages, but you'll find out all sorts of information. How to access a paper filing. If you happen to be an electronic filer or somebody says, how do I access my electronic filing? That information's there. Your department may be asking you to take an ethics and sunshine training. If you check on our website and say, how do I take the filing, the ethics and sunshine training, our information will bump you to SF Learning at DHR. The ethics and sunshine training is twice as long as what you'll find on DHR's site, and it is specific to department heads, electeds, boards, and commissioners. But if you forget that and you do bump into our ethics and sunshine training site, we will tell you, if you're a designated employee, go look at DHR. So thank you. I am just tickled that you took the time to attend. I'm glad that we were able to meet by Zoom. I look forward to meeting each of you face-to-face or talking to you if you have questions. But at this point, that concludes the formal presentation, and we'll open this up to questions.
Okay, Pat, just please stand by. For those folks who have joined us after we initially started, during this Q&A segment, attendees joining on computer and or laptop who wish to ask a question should raise your hand by selecting the hand icon and wait for the host to call your name and unmute your mic. If you are joining us by telephone, dial *3 to raise your hand. You will also unraise your hand by hitting *3 again. And for those of you who may not be familiar with the raise hand functionality in this WebEx platform, rest assured, we're here to provide, to help you and assist you during the Q&A portion of today's session. So, all right, I'm going to, all right, Pat, our first question is coming from Rachel Marshall. Hello, Rachel, you have a question for Pat?
Hi, thanks so much. I have a couple of questions. One is, first of all, thank you for this. It was really helpful. I wish I had had it before because I certainly filled out my initial form completely incorrectly and disclosed information I should not have. I'm wondering, you said that homes don't have to be listed. So first of all, if I correct, can I remove my home address from a form that's been already submitted?
Unfortunately, the form that has been submitted is going to stay on the record. But
Even
going
if I-
forward,
Even if I revise it?
yes, the original filing is going to stay available. And if you don't mind, we do have the Ethics Commission's Deputy City Attorney online with us. And I am going to defer to him to make sure that your answers are the answers you need and not just from me. Mr. Shen, are you available?
Yeah, hi Pat. Yeah, just confirming that I agree with what your response.
Thanks.
So there's no way to redact that?
No, it
That's
cannot be removed.
Okay, my other question for going forward is, if we have to register a home to Airbnb, would that require us to list it as a small business?
I don't know if it's a small business. The income does have to be reported. Andrew, I don't know.
Yeah, so in terms of the rule regarding non-disclosure of your primary residence, that exception goes away if you use any portion of your home for business purposes. So if you are renting a room or some space within your home as an occasional Airbnb, you would need to continue to disclose your primary residence, assuming it's within your disclosure category. And then in terms of your income from Airbnb, it's actually a little strange, but the guidance I've received on this issue from the State Ethics Agency, the FPBC, has advised that for those Airbnb rentals, you don't treat Airbnb as a source of income, but the actual individual renters who use the Airbnb platform, which is a little odd because a lot of the people who would tend to be Airbnb renters probably of your property are probably occasional tourists or people who don't do sort of repeat visits to San Francisco and so are generally not reportable. So the end result is probably you would need to continue to report your residence, but probably not the individual tenants or Airbnb itself.
Okay, thank you.
So clarification for me. So it is not listed as a business. It's listed as income from a particular source.
Yeah, the source of income under the FEBC's analysis has always been sort of Airbnb renters would be the potential sources of income. But if it's someone who's visiting from, I mean, back when this used to happen, of course, pre-COVID, if it's someone who's visiting from Europe or something, and this is like their one and only visit to San Francisco, they wouldn't be a reportable source of income anyway.
All right. And
Just to be
for those
clear
folks,
that-
I'm sorry, Rachel, go ahead.
I was just going to say the city of San Francisco requires you to register as a small business in order to host for Airbnb. That's why it would count as a small business, I thought.
No, that's a very fair point. I mean, this is just the guidance I've received from the state on it. So it's a slightly different purpose and a slightly different perspective.
Okay. And for folks who have asked a question, just to keep track, if you can unraise your hand once your question has been answered, we'd appreciate it. Thank you. All right, we are moving on to Sohail Warsi. Sohail, do you have a question for Pat?
Yeah, thank you for taking my call. The question I have is with regards to the Schedule 1A. So if I have acquired some stocks from, let's say, Company A in 2019, and I reported that in 2020 Form 700, and then in the year 2020 acquired stock from Company B, on the 2021 Form 700, do I need to report both A and B or just B?
Thank you for remembering that this is being recorded and will be available to the public and using non-specific references. Again, if you have a particular question and you want to talk about facts and naming details, please reach out to us privately for an appointment. So I'm going to say both are reported. Andrew?
Yeah, that's correct. So if you still own investments in Company A and Company B, and the value of those investments are more than $2,000, you would continue to report both A and B on your Schedule A1 going forward.
Right.
And company B would also include the acquisition date.
All right, our next individual who has a question is Thomas Richardson. Hello, Thomas. Do you have a question for Pat?
Yes. My question is related to the description of, it's both the investment category 1A, disclosure categories 2 and 3 seem to indicate that you, like category 2 indicates that you would only report business related to the city of San Francisco and or the department that you work for, who does contracting, and then disclosure 3 sounds like it's only if you disclose who's under the regulatory or permitting or licensing authority of the city. And so my question is related to if you're invested in individual stocks in your retirement like a retirement fund, do you have to report individual stocks that don't do business with the city?
I'm going to be asking some clarifying questions because I have to unpack this. So
Sure.
It sounds like, given the detail that you were mentioning, it sounds like you are actually looking at the Campaign and Governmental Conduct Code section that applies to your department. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know. I received a designated position list, and I looked up my categories that applied to my position. And then when I read it, it seemed like you only need to report things that either businesses that contract and do or supply services to the city, or under the regulatory or permitting authority of the city or the department that I work for. I have individual stocks in a retirement fund, and I was curious if you need to report individual stocks that are just companies that don't do business with the city. I asked the departmental HR person for our group the same question, and she forwarded me to this training because she thought the answer was no, you don't have to, but she wasn't entirely sure.
Andrew, correct me if I go off the rails here, but I'm going to, it sounds like you have received information that is specific to you related to your position at your department. Therefore, if you're looking at a designated designated filer category that applies to you, and you are seeing what you have to disclose, if you're talking about stocks that are part of a mutual fund, that mutual fund does not have to be reported.
Right. These are not mutual funds. These are individual stocks that have been invested in.
And if the value of those stocks is over $2,000, Andrew,
Yes.
I'm saying it's reported.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, Thomas, I'm not really sure what disclosure category you're referring to. I would say as a general matter, you need to look at your disclosure category first to determine what you need to report. So
Right.
if whatever you would potentially report, whether it's investments, whether it's sources of income, what have you, is outside the scope of your disclosure category, then you don't need to report it. And then if we need to have more detailed discussion, we probably need to do it offline.
Yeah, I was going to say perhaps it would be easier to call or email the question to the, should I do that directly to the Ethics Commission or should I contact you, Andrew?
You can send an email to me and Pat, so you can find either of us on sort of the city's email system.
Okay.
And I think you can see our names on the screen.
Yep.
Okay.
I'll do that.
Thank you, Thomas.
Yep.
All right. Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you. Thanks, Andrew.
And as a reminder, Thomas, if you can unraise your hand also. All right, we are moving on to a next question by an individual with the initials ML. Hold on just 1 second, please. Hello, ML.
Hi.
Do you have a question for Pat?
Yes, hi, Pat. So just to make sure the Schedule B interest in real property, even though the first line says parcel number or street address, just leave it blank. right?
Parcel number.
Parcel
Yes.
number?
Address, the address of the property is sufficient.
Well, then we are listing our home then. Or is is scheduled for rental properties as opposed to like your home?
Schedule B is for any property owned in the city and county that's other than your home.
Oh, other than home. Okay.
Right. And if you don't mind me just adding a little bit, unless you're using part of your home for, if you're using part of it for a business purpose, or if you're renting out part of it home.
Okay.
Otherwise, you don't need to report your residence. And in terms of reporting a residence, if you need to do it, you can list either the street address or the assessor parcel number.
Street address, but not with the number on it.
Yeah, it's up to you. You can list either one if it's subject to disclosure.
But the parcel number people can trace back to what the actual property is, no?
That's correct. I mean, I guess the idea is that maybe it requires people to do sort of one more step, but you're absolutely right. It's pretty easy to look up the
Okay.
assessor parcel number as well.
So we could just write the address without the number, and that would be sufficient.
You don't need, yeah, that's correct. If you do need to disclose your home, you don't need to list both the home address and the assessor parcel number. It's either or.
And then of course, like if you moved out of your primary home and made it a rental property, then you would just disclose it for that period of time, right?
Right. I mean, and as I think Pat mentioned previously, what we're covering in the one that the Form 700 you're filing probably in the next couple of weeks is you're covering all of 2020. And so you would be reporting that home if it was a rental property for at least part of 2020.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, ML. All right, please stand by. All right, we have a question from Scott Stillman. Hello, Scott. Do you have a question for Pat?
Yes, thank you for the training. And I had a question on when you talked about the sale of a home on Schedule C, does I'm just confused when you look at the boxes. It talks about like name of source of income and the address, and it says business address acceptable or business activity or your business position. It all seems designed to really be dealing with a business, but am I supposed to put the home address that was sold?
Andrew, can you help me on this?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I understand the question. So you recently sold a property and you're inquiring how to report the sale. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, if you go down the Schedule C, Pat, I think you have like one more slide to go. Yeah, so Schedule C is where you would report the purchaser. And then you see how there's that box for sale of?
Yeah, so will you put the purchaser's name?
Yeah, so the source of income would be the person who paid you for the property.
And would that be the individuals who bought it or the people they got their loan from?
Be the actual person who, paid for the property. So it wouldn't be like the bank or something if it was just a loan or mortgage.
Okay, and do we put their old address before they bought the home or their new address? It seems very bizarre that we'd put an individual down and disclose somebody's like information in that regard.
If it's within the scope of your disclosure category, it's reportable. I mean, I would certainly urge you to double check your disclosure category, because I think as Pat explained, your disclosure category is kind of the starting point for all this. You only need to report interests that fall within that category. If it's outside, then don't worry about it. But if it's within the category, then you do need to report it. Yeah, and you may need to report people who purchase a home, a car, something off eBay, like whatever. Like you would need to potentially report on Schedule C if it's in your category. Now, if in terms of the person who bought it, you could list their office address, I suppose, if that's a concern of yours.
Yeah, I just don't know what their office address is, but I guess do you think I'd put their address of the place that they bought and then now live, or would I put their old address?
Oh, you don't have a business address at all? I mean, I
No, I
think
mean,
you,
it's just like I had like a residential home and these were
Uh-huh.
new residents who like bought it. So like, I don't know very much. I don't even know if I know their old address. I mean, you don't get a lot of information on those people.
sure. Well, let me ask it another way. I mean, do you have any sense of the person who purchased the home? Like, is it someone who's in San Francisco? I mean, was the
Mm.
home in San Francisco?
The home
The
was in
property
San
in San
Francisco, yeah.
Francisco? Okay. Yeah, I think you would need to report it. I mean, I think it wouldn't, I mean,
Okay.
if you, I assume you had some sort of broker or agent helping you with the sale or the transaction.
Yeah.
I mean, hopefully they can help you provide, they can provide a business address that would help, respect that person's privacy. That would be one option to pursue here.
Okay. And can you just remind me then, how do you find your disclosure category again?
Yeah, so I think, sorry, go ahead, Pat.
Oh, the disclosure category is available on the Ethics Commission's website. This slide deck will take you directly to, it's called American Legal, and it will take you directly to the list of departments and the working job titles and the
And
disclosure
we can
category.
access this, I'm sorry, and we can access the slide deck how?
The slide deck will be in the same place that you went on the Ethics Commission's website to log into this session. So instead of being able to log in, we're going to replace the buttons with the slide deck.
Okay, I just got kind of sent it in the body of an email. But okay, yeah, I'll find it. Just one last question.
Okay.
So for Schedule A2, where it talks about a business ownership of over 10%, is that the case like for if I'm like a member of an LLC, but the business doesn't do, and the LLC does not do any business in San Francisco?
Andrew, I'm going to defer to you.
Yeah, I mean, that's the same. It really, there needs to be some sort of San Francisco connection or nexus to be something that's reportable on the Form 700. So if it's an LLC that is, does business in some other part of the country, then you wouldn't need a report.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, no problem.
All right, thank you, Scott. All right, and Scott, if you can unraise your hand also, I'd appreciate it. Okay, we're moving on to the next question, our next customer, with the initials MS. Hello, MS.
Hi.
Do you have a question for Pat?
I do. I have two. One is, where do we send all the forms we collect from our department to you, or do we just keep them on site for inspection?
You
Am I
keep them
sending-
on site just as in regular years when you collect the Form 700s of your paper filers. Wherever those are kept at your department, because they are publicly disclosable, just keep the forms that you're receiving by mail or hard copy in that same place.
Okay. And do we send anything to you to confirm that we've received them all, or you assume that we've just received them all?
No. So every year, something called a filing officer report is supposed to be sent to the Ethics Commission. So for people who manage the paper filers, you will be sending a form. It's now in DocuSign. You'll be sending a form by Monday, April 12th, to the Ethics Commission, indicating that all of your paper filers have filed, or if you had people who didn't, you're going to give us their contact information for a follow-up by our office.
Okay, thank you. And just last question, is there any way to drop in a chat, or because I received an email too, just how to look up our discovery category?
So no, we're not using chat for this particular recorded session, but you can send questions to the Ethics Commission's mailbox at ethics.commission@sfgov.org. Also, if you just want to look it up, when this slide deck is online, there'll be a link to it.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
All right, thank you, MS. All right, and then MS, if you can unraise your hand, that'd be appreciated.
And we do have just about 7 or 8 minutes left for questions. So if we don't get to your question live, do send us a written request at the main mailbox for the Ethics Commission. We'll get an answer for you.
Like our next question is from Tina Kwan. Tina, do you have a question for Pat? Hello, Tina. Do you have a question for Pat? One last try, Tina. Are you there? Okay, we're going to move on from Tina. Looks like we have a question from Jack Wilson. Hello, Jack. Do you have a question for Pat? Hello, Jack. Oh, hello, Jack. Are you there? Do you have a question for Pat? All right, we're going to move on. Please stand by. Okay, we have a question from a call-in user. Hello, do you have a question for Pat?
Hello. Can you hear me?
Hello.
Hello.
Yes.
Yes.
Hi. Hi, Pat. I'm just
Hi.
this question's more of a question, like a administrative question. So I know the form's like 23 pages, and I'm gonna be printing this at home, and sending it in through the mail. Was wondering if let's just say I had some individual stocks I own, and I need to disclose the schedule. I think it's called Schedule A. Would it be possible if I just send pages 5 and 7, and that's it, or do I have to print out all 23 pages?
That's exactly right. So if you are downloading the form with the link that was sent to you, it's going to be a Fair Political Practices Commission form. It's a fillable PDF. There is a print button at the bottom of the actual schedule, and that's all you have to send. So if you're just sending the cover page, you only send one sheet of paper. If you are submitting the cover page plus a Schedule A2, you're submitting 2 sheets of paper. You don't have to submit more.
Got it. Okay, that's it.
All right, thank you. All right, Pat, looks like we only have one more question in the queue. All right, this is coming from Chris Castle. Hello, Chris. Do you have a question for Pat?
Yeah, just a quick question. If your disclosure category 1, do you still have to report your primary residence?
No, a primary residence does not have to be reported,
Okay.
even if you're disclosure category 1.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to confirm that.
Thank you so
if you
much.
have any, thanks, Ronald. So again, if you have any follow-on questions, send them to the main mailbox of the Ethics Commission at ethics.commission@sfgov.org. This training will be available in a YouTube info session, and this slide deck will also be on the Ethics Commission's website, where you logged in to participate here. Even if you got it in an email saying log in here, it's probably going to take you to the page where this slide deck and the YouTube video is going to be. I am so tickled to have been able to reach out to you guys. And if you have any questions, spread the word. We're here to help. Thank you, everybody. Have a good afternoon.